Hey guys, before we start this episode, I wanted to talk to you about Type 1 Lifting. So Type 1 Lifting is a clothing line that proceeds of the shirts and tanks and everything else goes to the Children's Diabetes Foundation. So this all came about with me and seeing a 5-year-old girl in the emergency department that had new onset of diabetes. So just take a look at the website. It's www.type1lifting.com. So just check it out. If you don't buy anything, that's perfectly fine. I would just like for you just to take a look and just see what we have. So like I said before, www.type1lifting.com. And guys, I hope you enjoy the show. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Type 1 Lifting Podcast. Thank you again for tuning in. I have a very special guest, actually Linda Franklin's coach, Rodney Miller. How's everything going?
It's going great. It's a little hot out here, but other than that, I'm surviving.
Yeah, so you're in Texas. Now, whereabouts in Texas are you?
So I'm in what's considered to be West Texas, so out in Midland. And
Okay.
They call it Midland because it's the halfway point between Dallas and El Paso.
Okay.
That's literally why it's called Midland. So we are right on the edge of the desert.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very hot. Very, very dry.
Yeah, I've actually, when I was in the Air Force, I actually was stationed in Wichita Falls, Texas, like 20 minutes south of the Oklahoma border, and then we were like in San Antonio, then Austin, you know. So I know that's like even further west where you are. So
yeah, we have nothing but tumbleweeds and pump jacks out here.
Yep, exactly. With Wichita Falls, Texas, the same thing. There's like middle of nowhere, nothing going on.
Yeah.
But so you're a type 1 diabetic. So I like to talk to all my guests, when did they get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes?
So I was diagnosed at 4 years old, and pretty typical diagnosis story. Was experiencing a lot of thirst, was drinking a ton of fluid, was urinating a ton, and eventually our parents were like, something's wrong here, we need to do something about this. And so took me into the ER, and I tested at a 880 blood sugar, so catastrophically high, right, like off the charts high. And where it kind of differs a little bit for most people is that I actually fell into a coma for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And don't really remember a whole lot, lights and general sounds and stuff like that. But, you know, it's like being in a fuzzy cocoon. You couldn't reach out and interact with anything. You just kind of got those inputs in. But like anyone that knows me for very long realizes that I am an incredibly stubborn creature. So I guess I decided that, this isn't going down like this at this point in time. So after about 2 weeks, I came out of the coma, and that's kind of where we started with the type 1 journey. Very rudimentary the first few years. I actually grew up in southern Oklahoma, where medical care is not probably the highest standard comparatively across the U.S. And so we were told a lot of things like, you know it better than we do, you deal with it. So we, worked off of some antiquated charts and stuff like the exchange system. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Basically, one fruit serving equals this much insulin, and one meat serving equals this much. Yeah, not the most accurate way to do it. And I actually didn't meet another type 1 until I was 23 years old.
Wow.
So I was very isolated, kind of in my own bubble, trying to sort through all these changes that was going on, and stuff like that.
Yeah, so when you were a kid and you're like the only diabetic that you know of, so what was it like? Did you have a hard time like playing with other kids, or like what was your childhood and like high school years like before you actually noticed there's other diabetics out there?
Oof, I would say, to kind of give you a little bit of understanding too, is you have to understand that my parents were incredibly strict. For good reason, but it still really kind of hindered coming into my own as taking care of it as my own. I was 16 years old before I was allowed to give myself my own shots.
Wow.
Yeah, so very, like I said, it was a very tightly controlled, and at that point we were using Humulin R. So if it came down to mealtime, because this was before CGM, so we would check blood sugars before meal times, and if I was high, they would dose me with insulin, and then I'd have to wait 45 minutes before I was allowed to eat. And if I was too high, I just wasn't allowed to eat, period. And so that was a very, hard line in the sand type structure to grow up within. And so by the time I got into my teenage years, I took that male rebellion phase that I feel like we all go through to some extent, and I just went completely off the charts with it. Growing up, the kids in my class, they really didn't understand, especially early on, why I was different or why I had to have these special things, why I was allowed to have snacks in the afternoon, because that was another thing that came with the exchange system is they had 5 meals a day, 3 primary meals and 2 snacks, an afternoon and then a bedtime snack. And so that structure was pretty strictly adhered to. And so they didn't understand why I was allowed to eat in class and have these other snacks. And even the teachers, there were several times where we would have teachers refuse to let me have an afternoon snack, even though I would have been dosed with insulin from that. So, yeah, not really any fault of them. They probably should have been a little better educated, but we didn't have a school nurse. And there were 17 kids in my graduating class. This is a very small school with very inadequate resources to deal with something like this. In my teenage years, like I said, I just went full-blown rebellion, drinking and everything like that, those types of behaviors that just didn't lend itself very well to any sort of blood sugar control. And then kind of the end, tapering off into my teenage years, the 17, 18, 19 years of age, I actually put myself in the hospital 6 times with DKA. And one of the times, it was severe enough that they couldn't get an IV needle in me.
Wow.
Because I was so dehydrated. I'd lost about 12 pounds of water. And so it was very difficult. And, those things, in the moment, you're like, God, this is dumb. Like, why am I doing this to myself? And then, then you go back and you're hiding, taking shots. And I was one of those very, very withheld about what I had because it had always been used against me. Why do you get special treatment? And my father told me something that's going to sound very harsh to viewers, but you have to understand that where he was coming from was he was trying to prepare me for the unfairness of life. And this comes from a man who, when he was a child, didn't have a home to live in for a number of years. They were actually squatters in Texas. So he told me I was about 12 years old. I was really having a hard time with things. I was going through puberty, which if any type 1s are out there that have gone through that, they know that that's the worst. There's no controlling numbers. And again, like I said, if I was too high, I wasn't allowed to eat. So I grew 6 inches over a summer, and I can remember being curled up in the floor in the fetal position from hunger pains, which is not pleasant. I don't recommend it.
No.
So, I was having a hard time, and I went to him, and, I'm kind of like, Dad, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to process this. And he was like, Rodney, nobody cares. You have a choice. You can let this disease control you and ultimately kill you, or you can take the steps that you know you have to do to take care of yourself. And again, it's not exactly true because as we know with things like this, and as we've gotten to be adults and out in the real world, we do understand that people do care. There are people there that will help you, will walk this path with you and help guide you when you need help. So, but he was trying to prepare me for those moments, those dark times where you're just fed up with everything and you've got sort of that innate decision, right? Like you've got the decision of, my blood sugar is 300, and if I don't do something about this, it's just going to get worse and could eventually turn into DKA, or I can get up and fight this level of apathy that I'm feeling to go get my insulin and take the shot and try to get my numbers back into the range. And that's one of the big things when I talk, especially to parents of type 1s, is that I try to convey that, CGMs and everything are great. It's real easy to get caught up in the minutia of the numbers. But the thing is that number changes a million times in a day. And you've got to understand that it's just a data point. It isn't a reflection of who you are as a person.
Mm-hmm.
You're not a failure because you have a high blood sugar. You're not a failure because you had a low blood sugar. It's life. There are an infinite number of variables that contend with your blood glucose level. And so at the end of the day, the CGM is merely there to give you more data. It's not the number doesn't matter. It just matters as far as what your next step should be.
Yeah, exactly.
I always feel like that's a very important concept to kind of get out there, is that these things are great, and they're great because they give you more data. They should never make you feel guilty about whatever numbers on that screen.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear that. That's awesome. I love it. So when you first saw your first other diabetic out in the real world, was it like looking at a unicorn? Like you couldn't believe there's another one out here?
Yeah. I was 23 years old, and so I'd gone this whole time alone, and it wasn't a magical experience. I'm not gonna lie. I was in a doctor's office, and another type 1 was coming out of an appointment, and it was an older male, probably in his 30s, and I was, obviously in my young 20s, and I was like, "Oh, you're type 1?" And he just didn't even acknowledge that I spoke. It was one of those people, and, you can't blame people. Everyone deals with things differently.
Yeah.
He was very much, you could tell, in the mindset that I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to acknowledge that this is something that I'm dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know his story. He could have been recently diagnosed as an adult onset, or he could have been at one of his burnout phases. You never know with that stuff.
Yeah.
And over the next few years, I would meet a couple, and it would be in the most random places, at the most random times, because that's how life works. And so I'd have, a quick 5 or 10 minute conversation with one, and, we call it meeting one in the wild, right? So,
yeah.
You never know when it's going to occur, and so it's always a little bit of a magical experience, and you get really excited. And I've since learned my wife has to rein me in a little bit because I get really excited.
Mm-hmm.
Here I am at this larger, bearded individual that's giddy like a schoolgirl coming at people. And unfortunately, I've intimidated a few type 1s probably because I've been like, "Oh my God, we need to be best friends now."
Yeah.
But there's something that's very, very magical about meeting another type 1. And, I talk about this when I because I talk at a few conferences and diabetes camps and whatnot. And I always tell the kids that having type 1 is like having a superpower. Because what's a superpower? It's doing something that normal people can't do.
Mm-hmm.
We live every day with a life and death disease that requires constant management, constant brain power to be up to date with where we are with our numbers and our food and our exercise and our insulin. And so we do all this as just an innate process. It just slowly becomes ingrained in us to have these running calculations going on. And so when you show up to play any sort of sporting event, you've already won. You've already carried something there that took far more effort than your teammates did.
Mm-hmm.
They put in hard work, sure, but you put in that hard work plus this additional thing that you had to take care of. And when you meet another type 1, no one else gets what that level of constant brain activity kind of wears on you, and how stressful it can be until you meet another type 1. Like my wife, I love her to death, but she doesn't know what a low blood sugar feels like. That panic where I have to eat everything in the house, no matter how weird it may be, because if I don't get sugar in my body, I'm going to die. Like that sort of panicked feeling.
Yeah.
There's no, I hope that she never has to experience that, but even describing it's not the same.
Yeah.
But when you meet another type 1, it's an instant connection because you know what that person goes through on a very intimate level. And I think once you have that sort of connection with another human being, you can act as an aid, if nothing else, to let them know that they're not alone, that there are other people out there that are walking the same journey. And I think that that's probably one of the most magical things about being a diabetic is that we have that sort of level of empathy with other diabetics that most people will never experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually saw another diabetic in the wild at Kroger the other day, and like I could tell because she had the CG the Dexcom in the back of her arm, and I was like, oh my god, I think I'm going to talk to her. I'm going to talk to her, and then like her son was with her too, and I'm like this, I can't do it. I'm like I want to do my social distancing, and I was like I need to get in, get out. I can't talk to I can't talk to her right now. But even though I wish I could, but like if I see like other people that have, because I don't have a Dexcom or like a Libre or a pump, so I pretty much do shots and prick my finger, which is starting to be turned into a real pain in the ass. But I'm working on getting the pump and a CGM shortly. But if I always see them, I always ask them, like in the beginning when I was a diabetic, I was like, hey, how do you like this? What do you think about it? What can change? Or have you tried anything else? Just pretty much pick their brain a little bit. And when I was working at the Children's Hospital in the ER, I've told this many times, but like I always welcome the new diabetics that come in or the diabetics that are there. Like all the nurses are like, John, there's a diabetic in room 18. Go for it. And I'm like, all right. So I'll walk in there, and half of them already know me. They're like, oh hey, good seeing you again. I'm like, well, you shouldn't be here, but yeah, it's always a lot of fun, like meeting new diabetics, especially through social media too, which is unbelievable. So
yeah, there's so many amazing people out there. We understand what it's like to try to be a successful athlete, even especially like a pro athlete, with this kind of extra steps that you have to take. And so anytime we see those, I did some interviews with Omnipod, because that's my preferred pump. And so Kate Hall, who's a long distance jumper and a triple jumper, was just really cool to talk to her and like see how she prepares for things, because we're both in the gym, but we're at very different ends of the spectrum. Obviously, I'm looking for 1 rep max strength or strength for time, and she's looking at explosive speed and stuff like that, and just how do those different things affect the blood sugar differently. And that's the kind of continuous thing that goes on, is because diabetes is such a gray area that no one's going to have the exact same protocols or the exact same reactions to the same inputs. And so it's always really interesting to me as kind of a nerd to be like, well, what do you do? And then what happens? And, have you tried this? And then what happens? And so, but it's also helped me to understand some of the metabolic processes that are happening that we're not always aware of, and try to piece together some cohesive plans for how to offset some of these things that occur.
Yeah.
One of the big things is that most type 1s experience a spike in glucose level with high intensity exercise, anaerobic exercise. And we attribute that, or some people attribute that, to adrenaline. And while there's a minor case of that occurring, the bulk of it is actually because your body dumps a little bit of glucagon to get glycogen out of the liver to then get it to the muscle tissue, because it needs a faster fuel source than breaking down fat and turning it back into glucose. So, we're seeing, and that's why some people, I spent a lot of years in the groups and stuff, and you'd see people talk about, well, I went up into the 300s while I was in the gym, and I didn't take a shot for it, and then an hour and a half later I was back at 120. Because it's just a transient high. You're seeing that momentary of trying to get the glycogen out of the liver and into the muscle tissue, and then once it's there, it's why correcting that is not always the best idea.
Yeah, and I've realized that like your other hormones kick in too, and that's another reason why you get those big spikes too, and then like it goes back to normal because your body's still in the fight or flight mode. And once like you're a half hour or 45 minutes done, it's like, okay, I can kind of like deregulate and like, my blood sugar can be back to normal.
Yeah. And then, the big thing with insulin sensitivity is so much more greatly increased after anaerobic exercise compared to aerobic exercise. So even then your basal for a period of time may be more basal insulin than you actually need. And so then you've got to, adjust that for that. And I came up with a pretty good protocol. I've worked with a couple of doctors at Biochem that specifically work in the nutrition industry. One of them does coach. You know, he has a nutrition group, and he does coach a few diabetics, and they've had a ton of success working with the guy. The other one is actually like a third-party formulator for supplement companies. So they'll go to him, and we have this idea for a supplement, and he'll kind of be like, well, you know, here's what you need to put in it. So I worked with those for a few years because the spike never made sense. It never made sense that it was adrenaline, because you're just, you know, full-blown fight or flight. You're not really experiencing that every time you go in the gym.
Mm-hmm.
If you are, man, you are super excited, and I want to come train with you because you're just, that's like being chased across the Serengeti by a lion. Like you're going way harder in the gym than I think I could. So, you know, when we kind of delved into it and we looked at some of these metabolic processes that were occurring, we kind of developed a protocol that I've used for years, and the CGM always reflects a flat line during training. And most of the other people that have used it, and you have to say most because there's always going to be
an outlier.
Yeah. So what I do is 30 minutes prior to training, I'll have 20 to 30 grams of carbs, and I use Gatorade powder because they use dextrose in the Gatorade powder,
mm-hmm.
which is only one molecule away from glucose. So I'll dose a full amount of insulin for that, plus an additional 1 to 2 units, depending on what I'm training. Obviously, if it's a max deadlift day or a max squat day, that's going to require a lot more output, and thus I'm probably going to get a lot more glycogen out of the liver
mm-hmm.
than, you know, a push press day. So what I'm trying to do is, you know, because insulin's not instantaneous, you know, Humalog is still 30 minutes to active in the system. So I'm trying to time it to offset what I know my liver's going to dump. And then on bigger sessions, I'll actually have more carbs intra-workout. You know, for strongman training days, like we could be training for 4 hours. You know, by the time you get the implements out, set them up, warm up with them, do the work sets, put it all away, you know, you're 3 or 4 hours in before you realize it. So those days, I definitely have to bolster my energy stores with having some intra-workout carbs.
Mm-hmm.
And then post-training, I'll have a very simple carb and a very lean protein. So I don't want any fat to impede the process of getting this food in my body to start the recovery process. But what happens is that post-training meal, I'll reduce my bolus amounts by 25 to 40%.
Wow.
Because I'm that much more insulin sensitive after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very body weight dependent, and, you know, how good your insulin sensitivity is at baseline and all that. So no one can take that protocol and just automatically apply it to themselves. Mm-hmm. But, you know, the eating before a carbohydrate source, and then you know, because doctors are saying this to cover their butts, but they say, you know, don't have any active insulin on board when you exercise. But that's not how a normal body works.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that glycogen dump and little pulsate of insulin is a very well documented thing, and that's why intra-workout drinks exist, is because they're trying to play off of that by giving you more insulin, so then it shoves more water and nutrients into the body so you can perform harder and longer.
Mm-hmm.
So why should we approach this any differently? You know, why, if we want to be, and that was what set me apart early on that I found, is that a lot of diabetics have a mindset of, I'm going to exercise as a means to help manage the diabetes. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that at all. It's a very well-documented way to help improve your management. But for me, I was always more concerned about being a better athlete, not a better diabetic.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking for what made me perform most optimally for the situation that I was in. And so the mentality of how I approached things was just a little different, because I wanted to know, you know, as a non-diabetic, what's occurring and how do I get to that, versus, you know, if I was just worried about keeping a stable number and nothing else, well, as soon as my blood sugar would start spiking from doing high intensity exercise. I just go do some aerobic cardio.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so it would come back down, so that's, you end up in those two schools of thought. Do you want to be a high-end athlete? These are probably the variations you need to look at versus, are you doing this for just health and wellness? And like I said, both of those are very admirable goals, because ultimately you're going to live longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear. So with all this exercise and fitness, so you're mainly into powerlifting. So when did all this powerlifting come about? Was it in your early 20s when this happened, or?
So in my early 20s, I'd grown up as a farm kid, and so I knew that being physically active, hauling hay all summer, my blood sugars were always easier to control. They were always more in line. And so I knew exercise was a huge aspect of it. But, I was kind of lazy and was kind of doing my own thing. And I had a desk job, so I really wasn't that active. And then my wife came to me and told me she was pregnant. And that's when the light switch flipped. Because at that point, I'd kind of just lackadaisically been keeping track of my numbers, letting my A1Cs kind of ride where they were.
Mm-hmm.
But now, here was this impetus of there's fixing to be someone depending on me to be there, to provide for them, to take care of them, and I am a huge family guy. That's very close to my family. We spend a lot of time together, and so it's very important to me. And that was what kind of made me go, I have to change what I'm doing, because it's not going to be successful long term.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really worked out. I never really played sports. I graduated high school at 5'5" and 117 pounds. Yeah. I was a tiny, tiny human being.
Yeah.
And was never really big, was never really strong. So I knew that the gym would be a big aspect of it, and then the benefit would be that maybe I wouldn't be so scrawny and little anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So when I actually got in the gym, I was about 140 pounds, pretty chunky. I think my first body fat percentage test came back at a 31 or a 32, so pretty high up there.
Yeah.
And I remember the first, I kind of did my own thing for a little while, hired one trainer, and it's one of those, he was on his phone more than he was paying attention to me.
Oh, I can't stand that. They just, one of my biggest pet peeves as a personal trainer, just watching that crap. It just, it's so annoying.
Yep.
So annoying.
It makes me want to frisbee a weight at him.
Yeah.
So, we just didn't really mesh off well. And then I met another guy, and, this was a Gold's gym. So, Globo gym, because this was before CrossFit.
Yeah.
Really powerlifting gyms even had become more of a thing. And this guy was an old school bodybuilder, like one of those blood, sweat, and tears type bodybuilders. And the first night we worked together, he pushed me so hard I actually had to run in the back alley and throw up. And I am the best rallier ever, because I can throw up, walk right back into the gym, and hit another max effort weight like it's nothing.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is, but that's just. But it was like one of those epiphany moments, because it was like, wow, I can push myself this hard. I'd never been an athlete before, so I'd never been in that situation to push my physical limits to the brink like that. And so I went, I did that, and we were doing something dumb like leg extensions, leg press, and lunges in a superset. And if you're not used to that kind of stuff, it will smoke you so quickly.
Yeah.
And it did, obviously. But then I came back in, and he was like, well, are you done? And I said, why? We've got 2 more sets left. And he was like, all right, let's go. And so that kind of flipped the switch for me, and was like, I don't know that I'll ever be good at this, but I enjoy this because I'm testing these boundaries, and I'm pushing myself harder than I've ever pushed myself before. And so I did what most guys typically do when they kind of get in the gym and like, oh, this isn't the most horrible thing ever. Is I bought the Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding.
Oh, yep. I know exactly what that is. Yep.
Yep. me and Arnold, we spent some quality time, reading and rereading, and followed bodybuilding religiously for a couple of years. Tried my hand at it a little bit, and do you remember the cartoons, the old school cartoons for Mr. Strong?
Yes. Yeah. The shapes or whatever like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Mr. Strong was an upside down triangle.
Yeah.
That's my body shape. I have the worst case of chicken legs that you will ever come across. Doesn't matter what I squat, how many reps I do, just will never have big, chunky legs. But my upper body, I'm as wide as I am tall. Like, it's abnormally so. So, this is what I look like. So bodybuilding was obviously not for me, because you got to have big legs to bodybuild. And I happened to come in the gym one night, and there was a flyer for an unsanctioned powerlifting meet. There was really just a bench and deadlift contest. And I was like, wow, I like to do these things. I really like to deadlift, so why don't I just train for these 3 weeks that I had before this contest and then show up? I ended up taking third in the deadlift and second in the bench press.
Nice.
Which I entered the day that I got there. I didn't even plan on benching. So I was like, oh, this is fun. I like doing this. And so that kind of started my powerlifting journey. And injuries happen and, stuff like that starts to occur. And after I tore my groin twice, just through a bit of stupidity and a bit of bad luck, came in the gym one day, was supposed to be squatting with a couple of national record-holding powerlifters based out of Dallas. And the gym was about 60 degrees. I didn't get warmed up well enough, threw the weight on my back, and I'm a pretty fast drop. Not like in a weightlifter type drop, but definitely for powerlifting, I was a bit faster. And when I hit the bottom, man, it was like a shotgun. It just popped, and I actually tore my adductor on my right leg. Oof. And couldn't walk. So
yeah,
because you kind of need that thing. And it was a muscle belly tear instead of a tendon detachment. So the doctor said, there's nothing to do. You just have to let it heal on your own. And at that point, my cardio was non-existent because, powerlifters of that time, when I was in the heat of it, it was more about being as big as possible to move the most weight as possible. It was like top fuel dragster versus stock car. You were very specialized in what you did. You waddled up, got under the bar, went down and up, and you waddled back and sat down and had, breathing treatments for the next 20 minutes because you were that deconditioned. And I was like, something's got to change. And so then I got into strongman. And strongman's actually where I spent the majority of my time, about 6 years competing in strongman. And I had a more natural aptitude for it than I ever did for powerlifting, probably largely in the fact of growing up as a farm kid. Bales of hay are odd objects, wrestling cattle and stuff like that. So I competed the first time in 2013, and I've competed at the national level in strongman, and I love strongman. I like the variability of the sport. I like the fact that there's, I may be asked to pull a 1 rep max deadlift, or I may be asked to clean and press a log for as many reps as I can do in 60 to 75 seconds. Pull a fire truck, deadlift a car, flip a tire. I mean, what about these things don't sound fun?
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of always been, I've had a lot of fun with it. Unfortunately, injuries continue to occur because anytime you're pushing that limit, and I talked about this a little bit, that you've really got to measure what you're doing. That's one of the things as a coach that is very hard to get across to your clients sometimes, is that I know you want to do all these meets this year, like 7 powerlifting meets in 1 year.
Yeah.
We really need to pick 2, maybe 3, and focus on those, because if you always spend time in meet prep, your body never has a chance to recover, and you're not going to make long-term progress that way. I found that out the hard way when in 2015 I was actually deadlifting a car at a ADA, American Diabetes Association event, and tore a muscle beside my spine.
Oof.
So sometimes, but I'd also competed 6 times the previous year.
Yeah.
Which is way too much.
It's almost like CrossFit too. So like in the early stages of CrossFit, like all those guys just went full throttle like every single day, just like murdering themselves, and then all the injuries just started just coming around and just wrecked it. And then people were realizing, hey, we should have like a deload week or like, you know, some rest days or something like that. Just something that's not like killing ourselves like every single day.
Yeah. You know, I've had clients come to me and be like, "Oh, I'm training 7 days a week." I'm like, "Stop! Just 7 days a week is too much. too much."
Yeah.
In fact, I have a client now who is incredibly strong, but you know, we'll get to the end of the week and I'll be like, "Wow, you had a day that really just kind of tanked effort-wise," and she's like, "Well, I may have done 2 WODs back to back," and it's like, you know. I'm not saying don't do those things, but just know that those things, they really should be slotted in a little bit better to overall programming.
Yeah.
Because especially for powerlifting, you know, we're typically setting up programs 16 or 12 weeks out. And I can tell you almost to the ounce how many pounds you're going to lift on what lift every week right up until the meet.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the most effective way to do it. Now, where I vary a little bit is that I use a rate of perceived exertion scale, especially for type 1 athletes, because if you have a bad day of blood sugars or, you know, you have a low right before the gym or whatever, you have to be able to moderate what weight you're going to use to offset that from occurring, right? Because not every day is going to be the most sunshine and rainbows day in the gym ever. So if you know that our goal is to have a perceived effort of 8 in the gym tonight, and you go in and you start warming up and you're still 20 or 30 pounds shy of that work set that we've designated that day, but you're already at an RP of 8, you need to stay there.
Yeah.
Because the body doesn't know how much weight is on the bar. It only knows how much effort that you're putting into moving the weight on the bar.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much more effective to get the desired effort out of somebody than it is to just hit this prescribed weight, you know, that we, you know, imaginary formulated off of some percentages. Like, that's not how, you know, reality works for most of us.
Yeah.
So and that's a pretty, you know, tough concept to teach to a lot of people is RPE.
So how many, like, obviously you're coaching Linda Franklin, like how many people do you coach typically in like a year or whatnot?
You know, obviously there's some ebb and flow to it, but I try to keep around 10 to 15 clients at a time. And because for me, it's not my primary income. And so I don't have to be as client heavy as some other people that have to do. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But it's a passion for me. And so we spend a lot of time, we talk a lot, especially leading into a meet. We may talk every day, you know, the week before a meet. Talk about strategy. We talk about what diets, you know, moderations we need to make to get you there on weight, on time to perform. So, you know, it's a heavily detailed process. And what I do is I'll sell a 12-week block of training for a set price, and then I send you a week's worth of programming. At the end of the week, you send it back to me with any comments or concerns. Mm-hmm. I adjust, and we go forward from there. So it's never that cookie cutter, here's 12 weeks of workouts, go have fun, try not to bother me type deal. Like, no,
yeah.
It's unlimited email. I'm a huge proponent of videoing your sets, and so I'll actually request clients to send me videos of certain movements. You know, the last set of this movement, the first set of this one, because over the years I've had a coach the whole time. You know, that's just, you need someone removed to give you that, you know, view in without all the bias that you have towards yourself. Mm-hmm. And all of it's been online because where I live, there's just no one out here that does this kind of stuff. So you learn over the years that, there's certain things you look for. You learn how to coach via video, and these are all really big things that I take into account when I'm setting up someone's program. And I know it's tedious for them, but, the first couple of weeks, if it's a new client that I don't have any sort of information on whatsoever, I'm going to make them video everything. I want you to video how you do ab workouts, because I need to see, what you're doing. Are you doing a plank? Are you doing an active plank? Are you letting your body sag through the movement, using your low back to hold you up? All these things tell me vital information that then I can put together a more cohesive plan to address everything. Because as a coach, one of my biggest things is to insulate them from injury. So I try to identify and then attack weaknesses in their symmetry, in their muscle balance and stuff like that, because that's typically where we see injuries occur. Is once that muscle imbalance starts to occur and that gap widens between strength and weakness between two opposing muscles, the possibility of some sort of injury becomes much, much greater. We look at most sports injuries, and it's hamstring tears or bicep tears. Well, those are both inhibiting extension. And so obviously these guys have massive quads, or ladies, and they're running full tilt, and simply the body's speed and explosive force by the quad to extend the knee can't be matched by the hamstring to act as a brake force, and then you tear your hamstring.
Yep.
So how do we address that? Well, you're going to sit down and you're going to do 100 banded hamstring curls at least once a week.
That's brutal.
Yeah. Your face just went, no. But, one of the nice things about bands is that there's very little load on the eccentric portion. And so you can acquire a lot of reps with it without there being a lot of joint damage or joint irritation. And so they work really well for those sort of movements like that. They work very well for shoulder exercises, for any sort of rehab type stuff. I'm a big fan of bands. And then hamstring curls, especially in a CrossFit box or something, like, it's very rarely that you're going to have a seated hamstring curl machine or a prone hamstring curl machine, but you're going to have bands, and you're going to do an RDL or a good morning or some other movement that acts as a big compound mover of those muscles. But at the end of the day, we need to get a lot of blood and a lot of nutrient flow into those things, especially because you sit on them so much as well. And those banded hamstring curls work. They work really well.
Oh yeah, I haven't done 100 banded hamstring curls, but I can imagine they work wonders. So I mean, even with me when I do good mornings, a lot of people try to go down as far as they can on those good mornings, and I'm like, nope. Like, when you just start feeling that little, like, that light pull, that's when you stop and you just head back up again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the big things, especially on RDLs. People act like they've got to try to touch the plates to the floor, and that's not the case whatsoever. It's about loading the hips and hamstrings, and you've got to work the posterior chain, the low back, the hips, and the hamstrings all work as one unit for the most part. So once you go past a certain point, the low back just gives out, like it can't maintain its proper alignment.
Yeah,
and then you're just shifting stuff to places it doesn't need to go. So one of the kind of tricks that I found to teaching people how to do RDLs very effectively is you push the bar into your thighs the entire time. And so what that forces you to do is it forces your hips to go back, because if you're pushing the bar into you, the hips can only go back to keep you going down. And then people find that they can only go about an inch, maybe 2 inches below their kneecaps, and that's it. That's as far as you need to go if you're on point with what you're doing. Yeah, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that's really big, that I'm really big on. And like I tell people, I'm going to come across as nitpicky, but it's these little nitpicky things that can completely change an exercise for you.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Some movements are about moving weight from A to B, but especially your accessory work should be about feeling the muscle work, taking it through a full range of motion, and actually being able to control contraction for that muscle.
Mm-hmm.
Because, the mind-muscle connection sounds really bro-y, but it's a very real thing. There's really only 3 ways that you get stronger, is that your technique improves, and so you're more efficient with applying the force that you can produce. The muscle gets bigger, which then you just have more mechanical advantage to apply to the load, or your CNS becomes more efficient. And so literally the pathways to the muscles become more efficient, and you're able to fire those muscles at a stronger rate. And so if those are the 3 ways, we've got to be addressing all of those 3 things at all times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are you a big fan of like banded pull aparts, or like?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I love doing those.
Banded pull aparts, face pulls, rear delt raises. No one trains rear delts enough. I don't care who you are. No one trains rear delts enough. Mm-hmm. It's just not going to happen. But a lot of times people grab weights and they just start swinging them around, and they understand that muscle is very, very tiny, and it has a very, very limited range of motion. And so again, with the bands, I can make you do 100 band pull aparts or 100 band rear raises, and eventually that rear delt is going to burn so badly. You're going to know exactly where it is. And what's funny is once you know exactly where it is and you feel that contract, you have a much easier time of hitting it again.
Mm-hmm.
the next week and the next week. And so it's that mind-muscle connection. You're burning in that pathway.
Yeah.
So much stronger. And I think that's one of the biggest things why I push a lot of type 1s into resistance training, is because if we look at radial neuropathy, deadening of the nerves in our hands and our feet, well, if we strengthen the nerve signals going down to there, maybe we can possibly stave off some of this late onset complications.
Yeah. That's a great idea. So, I remember talking to Linda last week about like how like CrossFit pretty much just murdered her hands. Like they were just, it did an awful thing for her hands. And so now she started powerlifting, and it's actually a little bit better for her with her hands and everything, because they don't really, it's not as grippy. It is as pretty much to CrossFit.
Right. So, especially me at 200 plus pounds, like a kipping pull-up is rough on my hands.
Yeah.
I can hold 200 plus a hand walking farmer's walks, but you start wanting me to swing on the bar, do toes to bars, or muscle ups and stuff like that, my grip strength is not going to hold up long.
Yeah.
And, talk about, highly contested things. Even in the powerlifting community, a lot of people view straps as, a gimmick or, something that's going to make you weaker. Kind of like the same people that think belts make your abs not work. I don't get that. But, so when we first started out with Linda on getting her into powerlifting, she wasn't allowed to use her own hands except on max effort lifts.
Mm-hmm.
The 1 days where we were training maximal strength. So all of her repetition days, or we do dynamic effort days at that time, I had her use straps just to take the strain off of her fingers. And then, we would train grip specific things at a later point. And so, even simple things like taking a rubber band and putting it around your fingertips and opening your hand 100 times.
Yeah.
Because we rarely work on extension for our hands, it's always contraction.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to offset that some to make for a healthy hand. One of the other things that I really, really like is you get a bucket of sand and you put your hand down in it and you open and close your hand in the sand, because it's resistance both ways, but it's not like a hard, not like using a weight or a big resistance band or something like that. It's more of a fluid type thing to get your hand to move inside there. So it's low impact because the joint is fully surrounded by the sand, and so it acts as kind of a support as well. And that's, especially if you could set the sand outside and let it get a little warm too, because then the heat helps to open up the capillaries and get better blood flow into the hands. And I think that's a really old wives' tale maybe type thing, but I've had a lot of good luck with it myself and with other people that have used that.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna try that one. So I mean, I'm in Georgia, so it's gonna be hot as balls anyway. So I was about to use it during the middle of the day or something like that. So
yeah, well,
awesome.
If you look at a lot of the toted home remedies for arthritis and stuff like that is they have the put on the plastic glove and you put it down into hot wax.
Mm-hmm.
Let the hot wax cool, because then it insulates the hand in that warm heat and helps to alleviate the inflammation that's there. So it's the same. You tend to find things, if you do this long enough, you find little sheets or tricks or tips or stuff.
Yeah.
To get you across the goal. There's a lot of things. I used to never be able to feel pullovers, very bodybuilder specific type move. Didn't matter what I did, any arm placement, I just couldn't feel them whatsoever. And finally, I was sitting there one night with my daughter, and I was raising her over my head as I was laying down, and I was like, "Oh, there's my lat." Finally felt that, And then you just take it and you run with it, and you go, "Okay, what in the gym can I do that's going to mimic what my child feels like squirming around?" And so I got a medicine ball or a heavy slam ball, and found that if I did, a decline bench with a medicine ball, I could really feel my lats work to a great degree.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. So you actually also started a non-profit charity. So can you talk a little bit more about that too?
Yes. So in 2016, I was looking around in the diabetes space. At this point, I was an admin for a Facebook group called the Type 1 Athletes Group. And there weren't any support groups or really dedicated events for diabetics that wanted to use a barbell as a means to increase their health. And I thought, well, this kind of stinks. There's all this misinformation and people are kind of going at this alone. Maybe I can do something to offset this. And there were, we knew quite a few lifters that were in the group. And I said, hey, let's all get together in Austin, Texas, and we'll do this event, and we'll just get together and we'll have some speakers from the diabetes community, and then we'll lift some weights and we'll have a good time. And so we had 23 type 1 diabetics show up to this event. And to say it was life-changing is a gross understatement. Because I was looking around, I stopped at one point and just kind of in awe, and I looked around the room and realized that if you weren't a diabetic in this room, that made you the oddball.
Yeah.
Being a diabetic was the normal in this room at this point in time. We were all lifting, we were all having a good time, and we all understood each other on a very base level. And so I knew that it had to continue from there. And I met a very good friend of mine, Roz, and she's from Philly, and she's very much one of those type A people. And I love her to death for it. So she was like, no, this has to go on. And I'm going to make you take it on from there. And so she helped me, I say, that I'm the founder, but really I'm the co-founder of Bolsa Barbells, and she's the other side of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got our 501c3 set up, and we started hosting events. We've done Philly, we've done Austin, we've done San Jose, we've done Miami, Wilmington, North Carolina. So we've kind of been all over the place. And how we structure these events is we want them, at first, a lot of people were taking it as this was a competition, like this was a lifting competition. And so we've struggled to kind of overcome that initial kind of mindset to what our events were. And they're not. We structure them in a way that they're open from people that have never touched a barbell a day in their lives,
mm-hmm.
all the way to elite level power lifters. We provide staff that has that sort of range of experience, from coaching complete beginners to coaching high level athletes, so that everyone can get something out of the event. And then we typically bring in motivational speakers, some people from some really varied backgrounds. We had a very good friend of mine, Colt Scott, who was on Netflix's version of American Ninja Warriors called Beastmaster.
Okay.
And then he's coached Ninja Warrior courses. He's actually a tester for those courses and stuff. And so, very neat guy, and kind of a, one of those kind of more oddballish type sports. So, and then we have physical therapists or endocrinologists or diabetic educators or nurses come in, talk about new diabetes tech, new drugs on the market, or injury prevention, rehabilitation, program structure. We all try to give tangible content that you can then take home and apply to what you're doing with your own training. Mm-hmm. Whether that's starting training or getting to the next powerlifting meet or strongman contest or whatever it may be. And then in the afternoons, because my background's in strongman and it's such a visually appealing sport, it's deadlifting cars and it's pulling fire trucks and it's flipping giant tires. I try to get people involved in that because it really is accessible to everybody. It's just overwhelming if you don't know what you're doing. And so we provide the coaching to allow you to understand the fundamentals of what you're doing. And the best case in point for that is that we had this event. It was in Miami. I didn't tell anybody what they were going to be doing. I just ushered them all outside. And they're like, "What are we doing?" And I said, "Well, you're going to pull a crew cab Chevy truck." And they're like, "No, we're not." Because no one sits around and goes, "Yeah, I could probably do that."
Yeah.
No, they're like, "No, this is a huge vehicle. There's no way I can do this." But everyone did. Everybody did. And what I find is that it's a very powerful tool in, changing the mindset of, I didn't think I could do this. I did it, and it really wasn't even that hard. What other things in my life have I not tried or not stepped out to participate in because I was afraid that I would fail at it? Mm-hmm. You kind of remove those boundaries. A good friend of mine, Chris Rudin, who is an elite level power lifter, a type 1 diabetic, and was born with a
abnormal hands. Yeah.
And so, his mantra is that limitations are self-imposed. And so I'm very much on board with that, in that, if we remove this mindset that I don't want to try this for fear of failure, then there's really not a lot that you can't do. Mm-hmm. It really opens up the scope of what you're capable of doing. And so we try to apply that to the events, and we take them through that. And then after that, we typically squat, overhead press, and deadlift, because those are big basic movements that I feel that everyone benefits from, and they're easy to slot in with a big group of people. But we break people down based on abilities. And so, you don't have someone that's never touched a barbell and a 600-pound squatter in the same group, because
that won't work.
Yeah, it doesn't work well that way. But we have coaches with every group, and so they're walking you through, they're pointing out, hey, try this. This will probably get more weight. And so I tell people, don't go for max effort. Go with something that feels comfortable. Just because I don't want anybody to get hurt. But invariably, most people, or a lot of people, end up hitting PRs or something like that.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool.
And that's that's an awesome experience to be a part of. I'm sure your years in the gym have taught you that. When someone hits a PR, it's a group celebration. Because you understand, what it's like to put in those hours, those days, weeks, sometimes months and years to get to this certain goal that you've had in mind. And then once you hit it, it's like, finally, culmination of all my work.
Exactly. Well, if you do another one soon, I'd love to partake in it, actually help out with it. So, so we're getting close to the end. So 2 questions. Well, actually, kind of 3. So, where can people find you on social media, and are you taking clients?
So, social media, my Instagram is probably one of the easiest ways to get a hold of me, and it is strong like troll.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So my nickname is actually Cave Troll. I'm as wide as I am tall. I can't swim. I'm afraid of heights. I should probably be holding up a bridge somewhere. So Cave Troll just really fits.
Yeah.
I am taking clients, especially with everything that's gone on. My primary source of income has slowed down, so I've got a big vacuum of time that help some people out. And either, you know, just because that I do coach a lot of competitive clients, you know, if you're starting in the gym and need structure, which most people do, or maybe you've hit a rut in your training, like, you know, not everyone has to compete.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for everybody. And I'm more than willing to sit down and coach through those people as well as the competitive athletes.
Awesome. Very cool. Now, the last one. So let's just say you met a new onset diabetic. What would you tell them what to expect as a diabetic for the rest of their life?
The first thing out of my mouth is probably you are not alone. There is a huge community out here that is very powerful and very willing.